I mean, we always had the idea for wanting to do voice control. The thing is, in the beginning, we didn't know 100% that it would work. You know?
When designing the game, the team really thought about the casual players and accessibility.
Because on PC, you have a set of tools, the keyboard, the mouse. It defines the experience that you're going to have. And we really didn't have those tools to work with. We had a 360 or a PS3 pad, and that limits what you can do without creating complexity or an experience that doesn't necessarily fit on the console.
We've started the voice command like 2 years ago, and yeah, we're still tweaking it now. And doing like the first iteration on adding words and tweaking them is very, very easy. You just get the middleware, which is phonics, which is very good, and you just type in whatever word you want with a phonetic spelling, and it's in. And as soon as you do that, that gets us to like 85% quality of recognition. But then after that, you can polish and refine and optimize.
Many Ubisoft offices around the world, so all those offices help us to test our voice command system. We send the version in Paris, in the US, anywhere. So our test labs all around the world help us to test our system.
It really is like a walkie-talkie or a CB where you hold down the trigger and you give your order. But the key is that when you pull down that trigger, a little menu pops up on the screen, and this menu has all the orders that you can give.
So everything that you could do on the pad with the A and X button and the two thumbsticks, you can more or less translate that to voice commands.
I keep my camera focus on what I want to see, but I can give any order to any unit on the map. I don't have to scroll the camera, to pan the camera.
With the voice command, as in the real world, you know, if you're on you can tell anyone, anywhere to do anything. You're not bound to what you're looking at. So it totally frees up the game, liberates it from those constraints of the camera. So I don't think when we decided to do the voice command we even knew how big an advantage that was. But it really immerses you in the role of the commander, you know. Analogy we sort of made, it's kind of like using the guitar is for Guitar Hero. It's not only making the game more accessible, it's also putting you in the role of your character.
The voice command, once you learn it, you just know it. It's very, you don't need to really think about what you're doing. You just say what you want to do and they just do it.
But now, once you play, the idea of going back from doing that is just impossible, I think.
I think that Tom Clancy really did something that cannot say really a restriction, but at least a guideline for us. Because for Clancy, although we may have some fantasy in our game, but that's not fairy tales. It's like a realistic fantasies. It's like what will happen.
We knew we wanted it to be near future, and again we sort of started off at that point. Ghost Recon's a soldier of the future. We wanted ENDWAR to be the army of the future.
I've done a tons of research before starting building up our units. Actually, the core concept behind all the unit design is one of the top-notch American technology, which is being developed right now. It's called the Future Combat System.
And that kind of became the cornerstone. So that was the US faction, and we kind of designed them first. And the key ideas for that future combat system is a very elite force, and it's a very mobile force as well, and there's very high sort of levels of technology and weaponry, so precision, lethality, survivability, maneuverability. It's genuinely sort of next-gen type stuff. They get the best drones, combat units. They're fast, they're very powerful on the vehicles, so they're just a very good balanced force.
For the GSF, for example, we wanted something heroic and really impressive.
And then we had to think, okay, what are the other factions, and how do they vary away from that? And Europe obviously has a very strong research and development industry for the military as well. So pretty much anything America's working on, someone in Europe's working on a competitive version. And the other thing we sort of took as an inspiration for the European faction is we imagined they're becoming the world's predominant peacekeepers. So we took the sort of stuff that you see in the UN or peacekeeping roles. So they've got more wheeled vehicles, non-lethal weapons, directed energy weapons, and they're coming away from a lot of that experience in places, you know, Eastern Europe, Balkans, whatever.
For the European, we wanted something more technologic, like something blue with lights, shiny lights and stuff like that. Yeah, something like a little bit futuristic, near future, really near future.
European forces are balanced a bit more towards being lighter and the advantages of mobility, and also have some very effective directed energy weapons, so tactical high energy lasers, microwave weapons, all this sort of stuff that's in development now. And then finally, the Russians are much less worried about that trade-off between speed and power, so it's very much about power. So they're big, heavy, heavily armoured, and also in some ways they maybe don't have the same edge in technology, but they've been fighting, you know, high intensity conflicts between now and 2020 in the sort of former Soviet republics and so on. So very, very hardened veterans, very tough, very brutal. These sort of profiles, you have this sort of, I mean, they really fit very standard strategy archetypes. You know, it's your balanced force, which is the US, your faster, lighter force, which is Europe, and your slower, heavier, tougher force, which is Russia. And players fit those play styles. Basically, players boil down into aggressive, defensive, and balanced.
The core of the combat system is the combat model, which Michael always talks about. It's a combat chain of who beats who, you know, what units are good against other units.
The goal with the combat chain was to be as realistic and as accessible as possible. We wanted anyone who's ever played a military or war game to be able to pick up and immediately understand how our game works and what the relationships are. And of course, those relationships work in the real world. There's a reason that, you know, the real military fields that combination of units, that they don't. The real military doesn't just do a tank rush or just do gunships. They have them for mission-specific roles, and the helicopters are tank killers and so on. There's 7 unit types in total. What we think of as the core combat chain, tanks, which are kind of heavy cavalry, gunships, which are tank killers, so they're kind of light cavalry, and transports, which are dual role. So they transport infantries, but they're also anti-aircraft, so they kill the gunships. So those 3 are the core.
Originally, actually, with our first iteration of the combat system, that was all there was. There was no hit points, no damage, any of that. We added some hit points, some damage. When we added the weapon systems, we would add various different damage versus different types, and just basically built up on that. Actually, we got to a stage where the calculations for it were actually too complex, and we had so many sort of variables and things that we had to tweak that it made balancing really difficult.
Then you've got 2 classes of infantry, which are kind of heavy infantry and light infantry. And the thing with infantry, they're kind of alongside the combat chain. Basically, the key thing with them is they've got to be in cover. And then there's 2 other units, again, which are outside of the core combat chain for various reasons. One's the artillery and the command vehicle, which is kind of an intel and support vehicle.
So we've actually toned it all the way back down. Now it's fairly easy for us to balance. If we find that the helicopters are too strong, then we can tweak them individually. We can, if they were too strong against infantry, we could do that. We could control that individually.
We had all sorts of, you know, really quite complicated systems for flanking and for morale systems and fatigue and weather systems, and if you were playing the game and they weren't actually making a big difference to the players' decisions or to the players' fun. So we just constantly purified down the experience to the core strategy, and I think we ended up with a much deeper, much more accessible, much more fun game.